This week, a court battle between CNN and President Trump over the White House yanking the so-called hard pass of a CNN reporter. Between the debate over the First Amendment, professionalism, and civility is the ongoing question of our role as journalists. Nationally syndicated columnist Ruben Navarette recently tackled that topic, and when we met up, he described himself as a man without a country in a changing media environment. You've written about mistakes journalists make that hurt our credibility. What do you mean when you say that we as journalists take criticism personally, too personally?
Way too personally. I've said before, I work for the Washington Post. I have for 17 years. If you insult the Washington Post, have at it. So I'm not going to take it personally. You didn't just insult my family, my livelihood, my mom and dad, or my dead grandparents. And I think that a lot of people in my business, when you see them on television and they're wearing a CNN jacket or a Fox News cap, the minute that you attack that brand, they react like you're attacking them personally, and then they respond in kind.
Sometimes they are being attacked personally. There are instances in which, for example, President Trump has specifically attacked Jim Acosta of CNN.
That's enough. That's enough. That's enough. That's enough.
Pardon me, ma'am.
Excuse me. That's enough.
Mr. President, one of the questions, if I may ask.
You are a rude, terrible person. You shouldn't be working for CNN. Go ahead.
That attack is half Jim Acosta, half CNN. He'll say, I'm not taking a question from you, Jim Acosta, because CNN is fake news. So the attack is both on Jim as a person and on the network he serves. What I'm saying is, even if you're attacked personally, you're not supposed to take the bait and get down in the mud with these people. And I've had plenty of opportunities to do so over time, but it's not my job to fight with the mayor or the councilman or the president.
You say we let our bias show.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not such a bad thing, because at least you know where we journalists are coming from if we're letting our bias show.
Right, but we're denying it, right? So we let our bias show so that the viewer, reader, listener knows it's happening, but then when we're called on it, we make excuses and we say, well, no, that's not, when we're not really coming out against the president. There's no bias here. All we're saying is that the president's lying, and we're fact checkers, and it's our job as journalists, we say, to call somebody on their lies. So the way they've couched it is to say, I'm just being a good journalist. But in reality, the bias is very clear.
Don't they have a point? Couldn't they be simply fact-checking and calling an unusual politician out? Or does that necessarily mean there's bias?
The old way we used to do this is you go interview the president says something that's inaccurate, you go back and interview Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, some other person from the blue team, and they'll point out that it's inaccurate. But for the reporter to, sometimes on the spot in real time, to challenge the president, whoever the president is, really crosses a line, because then you end up bickering with the president. And I'll give you one example. When Jorge Ramos stood up in Iowa in a room full of journalists and challenged then candidate Donald Trump to a debate, in essence, over the building of a border wall.
Excuse me, sit down. You weren't called. Sit down.
No,
sit down.
No, I'm a
sit down.
An immigrant and a citizen. I have the right to ask the question.
No, you don't. You haven't been called.
No,
but after 30 or 40 seconds, there was no question. It was a speech. At that point, he's crossed the line and ceased to become a journalist, and he's become an advocate, and now he wants to be on a debate stage.
Is this fixable?
I think the first step is admitting we have a problem. There's a challenge there because we are defensive by nature. And every time I write a column or give a talk or say something on television or radio that's critical of journalists, I hear from other journalists. And they don't just outright call you a traitor or say that somehow you've spoken out of turn, but they do come up with every excuse you can imagine as to why they want to avoid this kind of introspection.
The White House says it will temporarily return Jim Acosta's press pass after a judge's order Friday, pending development of new White House media rules.